I want to tell you about the day I sat across from my former trainee in a conference room and watched her explain, very calmly, very confidently, why the marketing strategy I had built over 3 years was actually her idea. She had a PowerPoint, she had printed handouts, she had a clicker, and sitting at the head of the table, nodding slowly, was the man who had promoted her over me 6 months earlier. I didn't say anything, I just wrote everything down. My name is Megan. I'm 36 years old. I spent 8 years at a mid-sized pharmaceutical marketing firm called Verado Group, working my way from junior copywriter to senior strategist. I mentored 6 people during that time. I documented everything. I stayed late when no one asked me to, and early when no one noticed. And in the end, the person who got my job was a woman I had personally trained, onboarded, and guided through her first 2 years in the industry. Her name was Priya. And this is the story of how I made sure that what she took from me cost her everything she'd built on top of it. I joined Verado Group 8 years ago as a junior copywriter, fresh out of grad school with a marketing degree and the specific kind of ambition that comes from growing up watching your parents work jobs they hated. I was not going to do that. I was going to build something. And for a long time, I did. My first 3 years were unremarkable in the best way. I showed up, I learned, I produced. I got promoted to mid-level strategist at the end of year 2, which was faster than average. My manager at the time, a quiet, meticulous man named Gerald, told me I had the best instincts for campaign architecture he'd seen in a decade. I wrote that in my journal that night. I still have the journal. By year 4, I was leading my own accounts. Pharmaceutical marketing is a specific beast. You're navigating FDA regulations, medical accuracy requirements, and the need to make something deeply clinical feel human and accessible. Most people find it dry. I found it fascinating. There's a puzzle at the center of every campaign. How do you make someone care about something that feels distant until it isn't? I became good at solving that puzzle. My accounts grew. My client retention rate was the highest in the department for 2 consecutive years. Then Gerald retired and we got Marcus. Marcus was 44, newly promoted from a sister office in Atlanta, and possessed of the specific brand of confidence that has nothing to do with competence. He smiled too much in meetings and listened too little. He had opinions about everything and knowledge of almost nothing. Within 3 months of his arrival, half the women on my team had stories. He never said anything overtly wrong to me. He was too careful for that. But in every meeting, my ideas needed more explanation than my male colleagues' ideas. My numbers needed more context. My wins were team wins. My setbacks were my setbacks. I documented all of it, not because I had a plan yet, just because something in me knew I would need it someday. In year 5, Marcus told me he wanted me to take on a mentorship role with a new hire. Her name was Priya, 26 years old, sharp, eager, and, I noticed immediately, very good at reading rooms. She knew within 5 minutes of meeting someone what they wanted to hear. It was a skill I recognized because I'd had to learn it. She seemed to have been born with it. I liked her. That's the part that still stings a little even now. I genuinely liked her. I spent the next 18 months teaching Priya everything I knew. I'm not exaggerating. I walked her through campaign architecture from first principles. I shared my frameworks, my templates, my client communication strategies. I introduced her to every contact I'd built over 5 years, and vouched for her in rooms she hadn't earned access to yet. When she made mistakes, and she made several early on, I ran interference, fixed what needed fixing, and explained quietly what had gone wrong without making her feel small. That's what a good mentor does. I knew that because I'd had one, briefly, before Gerald retired. What I didn't do, and this is the thing I have replayed 1,000 times, was keep clear boundaries around my original work. In the spirit of mentorship, I shared everything openly. I let her sit in on strategy sessions that were above her level. I explained my thinking out loud as I worked so she could learn. I sent her my campaign decks as reference materials. I CC'd her on client emails so she could see how I managed relationships. I was trying to accelerate her growth. What I was actually doing was handing her a blueprint. By the end of her first year, Priya was presenting in client meetings. By 18 months, she was leading some of her own. She was good, genuinely good, and I was proud of her. I told Marcus she was the most coachable person I'd worked with. I put that in writing in her performance review. Looking back, I understand now that Priya was also doing something I wasn't. She was managing up. Every week she had a one-on-one with Marcus. She brought him coffee. She laughed at his jokes. She referenced his opinions in meetings, not sycophantically, cleverly, just enough to make him feel like a presence in work that he hadn't touched. I thought it was a little performative. I didn't think it was strategic. I was wrong about that. 12 months after Priya joined, Marcus restructured the department. He called it a strategic realignment. What it meant in practice was this: there was a new senior director role being created, one level above my current position. It was by any reasonable measure the role I had been building toward for 3 years. I put together my case, documented client revenue under my leadership, pulled retention metrics, wrote a 4-page strategic vision document for where I could take the department. I had a meeting with Marcus that I thought went well. 2 weeks later, he gave the role to Priya. She had been at the company for 18 months. Marcus called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. He said Priya had fresh energy and strong executive presence. He said the decision had been incredibly difficult. He said he hoped I would continue to be a key contributor to the team. I nodded. I thanked him for his time. I walked back to my desk and I stared at my screen for 40 minutes without seeing anything on it. Then I opened a new document and I started writing. I wrote down everything I remembered from that meeting, every word Marcus had used, every phrase, the time, the date, the exact seating arrangement. I had been doing this for 3 years by then, keeping records of every interaction that felt wrong, and I did it now out of pure muscle memory, before the shock had even fully settled. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Priya step into the role. She was given my largest accounts. She was included in the executive briefings I had been angling toward for a year. She was announced in the company-wide email as a rising leader with exceptional strategic vision. And in her first all-hands presentation, she walked through a campaign framework, a phased approach to pharmaceutical brand launches that I had developed over 2 years and documented in meticulous detail, and she presented it as her own thinking. No attribution, no acknowledgement, just, "I've been developing this approach." I sat in the third row and I wrote down every word. After the meeting, a colleague leaned over and whispered, "Wasn't that basically your framework?" I said I wasn't sure what she meant, but I noted the date and her name. I went home that evening and I did 2 things. First, I pulled every document I had ever shared with Priya, every email, every deck, every framework, and I organized them by date. I had been meticulous about version control, a habit I developed early in my career. Every document had a creation date, a modification history, a clear paper trail. Second, I called a friend who worked in employment law. She listened to everything I told her. Then she said, "You have something here, but you need more than documentation of the past. You need to catch her in the present." I told her I was already working on that, because here's what people who take shortcuts don't understand. They take the output, but they can't take the understanding behind it. Priya had my frameworks. She didn't have the decade of thinking that produced them. And sooner or later, that gap would show. I just needed to be in the right place when it did. The opportunity came 3 months later in the form of a new client pitch, a mid-sized biotech company looking to launch a first-in-class treatment for a rare autoimmune condition. It was exactly the kind of account I'd built my reputation on. Complex science, small patient population, high emotional stakes, tight regulatory constraints. Marcus assigned it to Priya. What Marcus didn't know, what almost no one at Verado knew, was that I had a prior relationship with the biotech company's VP of marketing. We had worked together 4 years earlier before she joined them. Her name was Sandra, and when I reached out to congratulate her on the new role and mention casually that Verado would be pitching for her account, she was genuinely pleased to hear from me. We had coffee. I did not say anything negative about Priya or Marcus or Verado. I simply caught up with an old contact, talked about the industry, and mentioned, in passing, some of the more nuanced challenges that came with launching a rare disease treatment, the kind of challenges that required very specific experience to navigate. Sandra listened carefully. She asked good questions. Meanwhile, I watched Priya prepare the pitch. She was using my rare disease framework. I could see the structure of it in the slides she left open on her screen, visible from my desk across the open plan office. She was confident. She had no reason not to be. She'd used my work before, and it had performed. What she didn't know was that my framework had a known limitation I had never documented externally, only in my own private notes, a specific gap in how it handled patient advocacy group dynamics, something I had identified 18 months ago and been meaning to address. For rare diseases, patient advocacy groups can make or break a campaign. If you don't build them into your strategy from day one, you're building on sand. I had never shared that insight with Priya. I'd been planning to, and then the promotion happened, and I simply never did. The pitch was on a Wednesday. I knew how it went because Sandra texted me that evening. "Your old firm pitched today. Impressive deck. But they had a real blind spot around patient advocacy integration. We flagged it, and they couldn't answer the questions. Ended up a bit awkward, still deciding." I replied, "That's a tricky area. Happy to think through it with you sometime if useful." She replied, "Actually, would you be open to a conversation this week?" I said yes. I want to be clear about what happened next. I did not undermine Priya in that conversation with Sandra. I did not speak negatively about her or about Verado. I simply had a conversation with a former colleague about a strategic challenge she was facing, the same challenge, as it happened, that Priya had failed to address in the pitch. Sandra ended up not going with Verado for the launch. She reached out to me 6 weeks later about a consulting arrangement. I had already given my notice by then. I resigned on a Monday morning. I gave 4 weeks' notice as required by my contract. I was professional and calm in my resignation meeting with Marcus, who seemed genuinely surprised, which told me everything I needed to know about how little he had been paying attention. During my notice period, I did something I had been quietly preparing for months. I submitted a formal complaint to HR, detailed, documented, supported by 3 years of records, outlining a pattern of gender-based evaluation discrepancies in Marcus's management of our team. I was not the only woman who had noticed. I was simply the only one who had documented everything. Two of my colleagues, after learning I had filed, added their own accounts. I also submitted, separately, a documented account of specific instances in which Priya had presented my original work as her own, with timestamps, version histories, and a witness statement from the colleague who had leaned over in the all-hands meeting and asked if that was my framework. HR investigations move slowly. I didn't expect anything to happen before I left. I wasn't doing it for immediate results. I was doing it because the record needed to exist. On my last day, I packed my desk quietly. A few people came by to say goodbye. Priya stopped by my desk in the afternoon. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings. She said she had learned so much from me. She said she genuinely meant that. I looked at her for a moment. "I know you did," I said. She didn't quite know what to do with that. She left shortly after. I walked out of the Verado building at 5:47 p.m. on a Friday with a box of desk items, 8 years of documented experience, and a consulting agreement already signed with Sandra's biotech company. 3 weeks later, I incorporated my own consultancy. The rare disease launch campaign I built for Sandra's company won an industry award 14 months after launch. It was cited specifically for its integration of patient advocacy group strategy, the exact gap that had cost Priya the pitch. Sandra referred me to 2 more clients in the first year. I ended my first year of independent consulting with more revenue than my last full year at Verado. 8 months after I left Verado, I got a message from a former colleague. Marcus had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the HR investigation. The complaint I had filed, combined with the 2 that followed, had triggered a formal review by the company's parent organization. 3 additional women from other departments had come forward once the review became known internally. My colleague said the mood in the office was strange, that people were being careful about what they said, that certain meetings had been restructured. I thanked her for the update and went back to work. 2 months after that, I heard about Priya. A client of mine, someone tangentially connected to the pharmaceutical industry network, mentioned, without knowing my history, that a senior director at Verado Group had left under circumstances that were a little unclear. That there had been some questions raised about the origins of some strategic work, that it had become uncomfortable. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't need them. Here is what I want to say about all of it, now that I have the distance to say it clearly. I don't know if what Priya did was calculated from the beginning or something that grew gradually, a series of small rationalizations that accumulated into something larger. I genuinely don't know. And in some ways it doesn't matter. The outcome was the same. What I do know is that the thing she took from me, my frameworks, my strategies, my years of work, was never really transferable. You can copy the structure of someone's thinking. You can present their output as your own. But when the questions get hard, when the client pushes back on something you don't actually understand, the gap shows. It always shows. She built her foundation on something she didn't own, and foundations like that don't hold. I think about the version of me that didn't document everything, that trusted the process, stayed quiet, assumed good faith from people who hadn't earned it. That version of me loses this story completely. She walks out of Verado with a box of desk items and nothing else. The version of me that wrote things down, that kept dates and times and exact words, that made copies and maintained version histories, and reached out to old contacts and knew that her own knowledge was something no one could actually take. That version of me built something better than what she lost. Document everything, know your worth exactly, and never ever teach someone more than they've shown you they deserve. I've been running my consultancy for 2.5 years now. I have 7 ongoing clients. I have 2 people who work with me. both women, both exceptional, both very clearly credited for everything they contribute. I have a framework document I give every new collaborator on day one. It outlines how we handle attribution, intellectual ownership, and credit. It's 3 pages long. Every person who works with me signs it and receives a copy. I built that document because of Priya, so I suppose I have her to thank for something. Gerald, my old manager who retired years ago, reached out when he saw the industry award announcement. He sent a short email. It said, "I always knew it was just a matter of time. Well done, Megan." I cried a little when I read that. Not sad tears. The other kind. My mother called after I posted about the award on LinkedIn. She said, "I always told you that you worked too hard to be invisible." She was right. I did work too hard to be invisible. I just had to find the place where that work would finally be seen. If you're sitting somewhere right now watching your work get handed to someone else, watching someone else get credit for what you built, watching the people above you choose comfort over fairness, I want you to hear this. The record matters. What you know matters. The relationships you build with integrity matter. None of that disappears just because someone takes the file off your desk. They took the map. They didn't take the territory. Keep building. Keep documenting. Keep going. The right room will recognize you, I promise. My last day at Verado was a Friday. I had known it would be awkward. I had not anticipated how specifically awkward it would be. I had packed most of my desk over the previous 3 days, a little at a time, so that Friday morning looked like any other morning. I came in with coffee. I answered emails. I attended a 10 a.m. check-in like I had attended hundreds of 10 a.m. check-ins before it. Priya knew I was leaving, of course. Everyone did. What they didn't know, what I had been very careful to keep quiet, was the HR complaint, the documented record, the attorney consultations, the consulting agreement already waiting in my inbox. As far as the office was concerned, I was simply moving on. Priya stopped by my desk at 2 p.m. She was dressed well, as always. She had the kind of posture that reads as confidence, even when it isn't. She set a small card on my desk, cream envelope, my name written in her careful handwriting, and she said, "I wanted to catch you before you left." I looked at the card and then at her. "That was thoughtful," I said. She sat down in the chair across from me, the one I had pulled up for her 2 years ago when she was new and nervous, and I was explaining the basics of campaign architecture to her. I noticed she didn't ask if she could sit. She just did. "I know things got complicated," she said, "with the promotion and everything. I hope you know it wasn't personal." I looked at her for a moment. There was something almost genuine in her expression, not quite guilt, but its distant cousin. The look of someone who has done something they've half convinced themselves was justified. "Can I ask you something honestly?" I said. She nodded. "The framework you presented at the All Hands, the phased launch model, did you think I wouldn't recognize it?" Something shifted in her face, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes. "I built on it," she said carefully. "I developed it further." "You presented it as something you'd been developing," I said, "not something you'd been given." She was quiet for a moment. The office hummed around us. Keyboards, a distant phone, the low conversation of people who had no idea what was happening 6 feet away from them. "I learned from you," she said finally. "Everything I presented came from working with you. I don't think that's the same as—" "I know what you think," I said. And I said it quietly, without anger, because I had been preparing for this conversation for a long time, and I had decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to perform emotions I didn't need to perform. I'm not going to argue with you about it. I just wanted you to know that I know. She didn't say anything. I think you're smart, I continued. I think you're genuinely talented. I think you could have built something real without taking what wasn't yours, and I think somewhere you know that too. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Not quite shame, not quite defiance. Something in between. The look of someone standing at a crossroads they passed through already and can't go back to. I did learn from you, she said again, softer this time. I know you did, I said. That part was real. I picked up the card, put it in my bag, and went back to my screen. After a moment, she stood up and walked back to her office, the office that had been built for me, furnished for me, and handed to her. I watched her go, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction exactly, but something adjacent to it. Clarity, maybe. The clean feeling of having said a true thing to the right person at the right time. She had taken my work. She had taken my title. She had taken the room at the end of the hall with the window that faced east and filled with morning light. But she couldn't take the conversation we'd just had. She couldn't unknow what I knew. She couldn't unfeel what she'd felt in that chair. And she couldn't take what was waiting for me on the other side of the door I was about to walk through. I finished my coffee. I closed my laptop for the last time. I picked up my box, and I walked out.